Hey guys, thanks for tuning in today. Today we're talking about the 1980s. Angel of Discord's top picks. Go ahead and like and subscribe if you like music. I've got tons of picks, man. Lots of opinions. I'm not allowed to upload the songs, sadly, because I will get sued, and I don't want that. So just go to my artist page. Even if you don't have Spotify, you can type in Angel of Discord Spotify. This is just if you want to listen to along. Otherwise, just skip about 30 seconds and we'll be into the discussion. But if you want to follow along, this is how. You just go to Spotify, you go to Angel of Discord, you'll see the funny cartoon. You go down and you'll see the different releases, you'll see the albums, and it'll load eventually. Or it won't, and we're going to refresh. Fuck! If you have good internet connection, this will not be a problem. So you go to Angel of Discord on Spotify. It'll load up. You'll see the funny cartoon character. Then we'll go down past the popular releases, albums, singles, EPs, featured artist playlists, and discovered on. Now, artist playlist, that's where we're going to want to go. We go to see all, and there you'll be. You just go to whichever era you want. And these are just opinion, but they are in order. I don't put any bands twice. So, number one from the 1980s. And this was a hard thing to do because I love X Japan. One of my all-time favorite bands. One of the most underrated bands. But you can't deny Hallelujah by Leonard Cohen, number one. Lyrically, musically, everything. It's a masterpiece, man. Might be the best song of, I can't say it's better than Potbelly's Canon. I can say it's one of the best folk songs, probably ever. A band that I think was severely underrated because they weren't white and they weren't from the US, but they have now played Madison Square Garden on New Year's Eve and things like that. They're getting the acclaim that they deserve. Marilyn Manson's come forward. Gene Simmons has come forward and said, you know what? These guys are some of the greatest rockers that ever lived. Give them a listen. X Japan. Now, hopefully, if enough people start listening, we'll get all their albums up on Spotify. But right now, there's a best of, which is pretty sweet. And so I had to narrow down my choices. I still think I would choose Kurenai, which means I don't know. And it's off of their debut when they were just kids. Yoshiki's an amazing drummer. Hide's an amazing guitar player. I'll probably make a whole video about that. But for now, let's move on to the next song on the list, which is Redemption Song by Bob Marley and the Wailers. So in the 60s and the 70s, Bob Marley was around, but he wasn't really recording until the 70s. And he didn't really get, and this is amazing to me, any great recordings until the 80s. Not because they weren't recorded or written, but because he didn't have access to a music studio until then. So there's live footage of him playing these songs in the 70s, but the recordings are amazingly late in his career for a lot of his biggest hits, including Redemption Song, which honestly, who wouldn't say that's one of the best acoustic ballads, And I think he's one of the great pop writers. Speaking of one of the great pop writers, Willie Nelson. And we've got The Last Thing I Needed, The First Thing This Morning. What a great album, what a great era for Willie. Another artist that you would think his hits came out earlier, but a lot of hits came out in the 1980s for Willie. My parents played him a lot when I was growing up while they were cooking in the kitchen. Willie Nelson was playing, and holy God, what a beautiful voice. What's crazy about Willie is that he sang behind the beat. So when he was first trying to get signed, he had a hell of a time. Hard to believe now that he's one of the most famous artists of all time. But at that time, he had a hard time getting signed because that wasn't what was popular. It was very popular to sing right on rhythm. And Willie just likes to pull it back, which makes you feel a little bit more relaxed. If you know anything about that music theory, if you go a little behind the beat, it makes it feel slower. A little ahead of the beat makes it feel rushed. Willie liked to pull it back, and that's what gives him that chill vibe. Next, we've got one of my favorite bands of all time, Definitely a favorite when I was in high school. The Pixies. Not just Pixies. Because they were pioneering what the hipsters would later make an ultimatum, which is leaving out the. Honestly, probably Hey is a better pick here. But I chose Gigantic because let's have a ball, hey Paul, let's have a ball. You know what? Just playing. But hey, yo, call me anytime, Kim. Bass player that sings the song. Speaking of bass players, we've got Lemmy Kilmister coming in with Ace of Spades. Another band that recorded so many songs in poor quality in the 70s. Still good, but in the 80s, suddenly they got into recording studios with real equipment and wrote some really great songs and got them out. Jimi Hendrix's roadies, they were doing all that stuff. They'd been around the scene. Lemmy knew what he was doing. He was in Hawkwind before that. This guy was no stranger to music. Living Colour. This is a band I was really lucky to get to meet, but I was too shy. It's pretty funny because I've met a lot of famous artists, but Vernon Reid is one of the artists that I've actually revered since I was a kid. Playing Guitar Hero, Cult of Personality on expert level or whatever it was. I remember that, and it was my favorite song on that game. And so finally, when I was about 16, I got to go to a VIP Hilton thing, playing music. Vernon Reid and Living Colour were playing at this Experience Hendrix show in Las Vegas. Holy shit. It was so funny because I could go up and talk to Steve Vai just fine. But Vernon Reid, I was for some reason just too intimidated. I should have gone up and just said, Vernon, you're a legend, you're my favorite one here. But I was like, man, at that time I was like, man, I'm gonna look like a honky. That's the truth, that's the real truth. Pretty funny. Cult of Personality, honestly, I just love. It's really just Vernon Reid, man. The lyrics are brilliant. You know, the concept is brilliant. Look up an interview of Vernon Reid talking about his inspiration for the song and the lyrics. But on top of that, that guitar work is so creative and out there. It's sporadic, but still somehow sounds very good. There's something really punk about it. Speaking of sporadic jazzy guitar, that's just super punk and super raw, we got the Dead Kennedys coming in with more edgy lyrics. We're in the generation of Gen X now. We're in the 80s. This was a time where everybody was saying, you know, the Cult of Personality, the Ace of Spades, the Holidays in Cambodia. They were getting edgy about stuff. They were saying stuff like it was, which later got even more intense in the 90s. No matter what, Holiday in Cambodia stands the test of time as these jazz players took on a lot of punk rock ethos. Skate and Destroy, The Faction. This song is probably a little bit out of left field for a lot of people because I'm not sure that many people played Tony Hawk as kids. But this one, for me, was such a banger. It's got a real pro skater singing on it. I can't remember the guy's name, but this song is just brutal. You know, this is just real punk. Speaking of early punk, the Ramones, another band that you'd think was banging out hits in the 70s, they had some good stuff in the 80s. They had some terrible stuff too. They were an interesting band. I mean, you can get into the whole history of them being held at gunpoint for Rock and Roll High School, of all things. You'd think it was Blitzkrieg Bop. No, it was Rock and Roll High School, held at gunpoint to sing it perfectly. It was a terrible song. It didn't do any good. They might as well have pulled the trigger at that point in their career. Just playing. It's almost crazy that the same era that the Ramones made Pet Sematary, Nirvana made About a Girl. Doesn't that feel weird? It feels like we've been told a big lie. But it's because it was the end of the 80s. Nirvana actually wrote About a Girl in the beginning of the 80s that Pet Sematary came out. But punk hit hard and fast. About a Girl, Iggy Pop says it best. It sounds like the Beatles were dosed with Dramamine. That's what Iggy Pop said. He said he was given the record by Kurt Cobain after a show that he was at, and he listened to it and he said, you know, they're pretty good, but there's this one song on Bleach. There's this one song where if they keep doing that, that guy's going to make a shit ton of money. He did. Kurt Cobain famously proposed to Courtney Love by saying, "Hey baby, will you marry me? I'm a millionaire." I purposefully put Guns N' Roses right next to Nirvana because that's the old feud, right? That's the old feud. Which one's better? You kind of had to choose one. Axl actually reached out to Kurt and tried to be his friend in the beginning, but Kurt rejected it because he thought Axl was a misogynist. Axl was a misogynist. But the thing about that is that the Guns N' Roses had something. Rolling Stones had it. Aerosmith maybe had it. Sex! They were so good at it. They were so good at it. So sexy. I remember in middle school, the first time I heard Guns N' Roses, I remember because I was on, do you remember the old MSN Messenger? I was on MSN Messenger. I was on a fucking Mac. Man, I was a simp. Downloaded MSN Messenger onto a Mac. But then again, to be fair, I was like 11. But it was so that I could chat with girls, right? Hey, and I don't mean simp is a bad thing either. Because honestly, I think nowadays, it's even worse to be an alfalfa male. So, I downloaded that, and I remember this girl, it was not the girl I was interested in, it was her friend, but still, I was like, kind of like, whoa, this is one of the first times I've been really horny. She sent me Welcome to the Jungle, and she said, "Do you know what this means? I want to make you scream." Do you know what this means? What's he mean when he's talking about the snake? She said stuff like that, and she was just like, I was like, whoa, this girl wants to fuck. It's one of the first times I was ever like, this girl wants to fuck. And it was Guns and fucking Roses. What happens next? I remember going to Japanese camp when I was in high school. Fucking hot ass, bomb ass Japanese teacher, dude. Banging hot. Forgive me, ladies. But seriously, wearing a Guns N' Roses shirt. I forfeit. I quit. Hallelujah. Praise the Lord. The cult of Axl, right? Kill your idols, as he would say. Yeah, they just have a weird, special place in my heart, and it's a very sexual place. Also, in Las Vegas, you think you're gonna go to strip clubs, and they're gonna be playing Boom, Stoom, Tiger or some shit. Dude, it's always Guns N' Roses. You talk to strippers, what's their favorite songs to dance to? It's always Guns N' Roses. Because it's a little sexy, sexier, it's classy. It's not so direct. And you know what the thing is? Mick Jagger and Axl Rose don't get enough credit for lyrics. They're great lyricists. Welcome to the Jungle. You know, it's very Jim Morrison. You know, we always think of Jim Morrison with The End. Ride the snake, 10 miles long. He sounds like he's fucking. And he is. Hell, on some of the songs he is. Okay, that's enough of my rant. The thing about Guns N' Roses is they were kind of like AC/DC in that raw masculine way. But they were smarter. Basically, even Brian Johnson wasn't quite the same as Bon Scott. But Bon Scott knew how to draw out those themes that nobody was really drawing out in the 60s, 70s. Nobody was really going into hell. In the dark and the, ooh, I'm a bad, bad motherfucking boy. Like real bad, like a criminal, like gonna kill you tonight. Nobody was doing that. Nobody was doing that. Oh, it's too far. Even Mick Jagger would be like, Axl took that and he said, yeah, let's make it poetry. Jim Morrison, maybe. Maybe he did that. He did that. Lenny by Stevie Ray Vaughan. And this is one of the great guitar instrumentals of all time. Tone. I remember up at Paws Up Resort, we were only allowed to play, get this, Jack fucking Johnson. Not opposed to it, but I'm talking late career Jack Johnson. And because otherwise they thought people would complain, one of the women that worked there refused. She did not like Jack Johnson. She put on Stevie Ray Vaughan. Rather than getting complaints, for the first time ever, they got compliments on the music. Stevie Ray is easy to listen to, he's talented, and he sets a good vibe. Lenny's a great example of that. It's one of the songs where he rivals Jeff Beck. And honestly, in the 80s, you can see why Eric Clapton killed him. He was at his peak. I'm just kidding. Just playing, Eric. Eric, please don't kill me. Tom Sawyer by Rush. Rush was a powerhouse band, and they're another band that you almost think of as pumping out the classics in the 70s. But one reason I think we think the 70s are so good is because some of these 80s bands got kind of, put back into the 70s, and some of these 80s bands got kind of pushed forward into the 90s. The 80s wasn't terrible. Excuse me. I've always loved Tom Sawyer for the drums, and the bass, and the guitar, and the melody. How do I put this? I haven't listened to enough Rush. I've avoided Rush, and I know it's probably wrong that I have avoided Rush. But Tom Sawyer is my pick, partly because I don't know enough. 9 to 5, Dolly Parton. Dolly Parton's still cranking out those hits. We had Jolene in the 70s. We've got 9 to 5 in the 80s. Looks like Dolly Parton can't lose, right? I still think it's one of the catchiest choruses of the 80s. True men don't kill coyotes. We got Red Hot Chili Peppers making their first appearances. I believe this was on their debut record, if I'm correct. What a banger. That bass line just leads you right into what they'd be later doing. It's back in their drug-fueled, crazy socks on the cocks days. Speaking of wild, insane, and kind of dangerous, Raining Blood by Slayer, a band that got famous for people dying in mosh pits. And then you look at Kerry King and you say, how the hell did you grow that beard? There's two things I think about Slayer. I think they're lucky they wrote the greatest metal riff of all time in Raining Blood. Number two, how did he grow that beard? No, I'm just kidding. Number two, coolest logo. They have the best metal logo. Of course, they're one of the biggest metal bands. They have the best logo, dude. Blackball, The Offspring. This is a weird song. You don't realize The Offspring even came out in the 80s, right? You always think they came out in the 90s. You already know the guitar player was the janitor who hired the kids, or at least bought them beer to play in his band, and then they end up blowing up and becoming The Offspring, right? But you didn't know they started in the 80s, and you didn't know that it had a flamenco solo in it, and you didn't know that it was fucking punk as fuck. Hardcore. It wasn't just fucking pop punk. Check it out. Always With Me, Joe Satriani. We had to put a Joe on there. And this one, I've avoided Joe because he can be kind of cheesy, can be kind of over the top, which is fun too. Like live especially, I had the pleasure of seeing him live. Very energetic, entertaining guy, and very positive and upbeat, and he just sends that energy spraying out into the crowd while he flings his guitar around, right? But I was really surprised to hear this song because Always With Me, Always With You is actually a beautiful, relaxing ballad that it still has that intense energy of Joe Satch. I don't know what I'm doing. So Institutionalized, this song is hilarious. I'm not sure if they were being serious. I can't tell if their fans are even serious. I think it's funny. I think it's fucking punk as fuck. And I think that they were laughing their asses off on their way to the institution. Mr. Crowley. This was an interesting arms race between Randy Rhoads and Eddie Van Halen. And it's an example of how two great minds can reach an idea by being on a similar plane across the world. In different parts of the world, they both were inventing finger tapping. Apparently, Randy Rhoads was furious when Van Halen came out in the 70s because Randy Rhoads didn't have any recording equipment, but he'd already invented tapping all the way in Germany or wherever the hell he was. And he heard this record come out of America, and he was like, fuck. Can you imagine you invent a guitar technique like that, But he came out and he brought some fire. And what I like about it is that he used some more harmonic minor and some more kind of like, less kind of classically, but more dark and Phrygian mode to the same sort of tap. It's super creepy. It's a creepy song. It's got a weird, hokey organ intro. Everything you want from Ozzy Osbourne. Hokey, corny, kind of scary, creepy, funny. Green tickets hanging from poles. That's right. I remember Halloween. The Misfits, Halloween. What a banger. Glenn Danzig coming out in the 1980s recording that fucking dirty, raw shit. We're looking at Static Age. It's a tough one. Hybrid Moments is good. It's a little muddy in the mix for me. I'm a bit of a snob. I went with Halloween because I also think Halloween sums up the Misfits, right? I mean, what were they? Spooky horror rock. Super raw, super like fun Halloween themes. Halloween sums it up. When I was first ever getting into music, I asked my buddy Sky. I said, I was a freshman in high school and I was a little bit of a dork. I was like, I love Dio, I love Green Day, I love that shit. Give me some more of that shit. I like that whole shit, give me mo shit. He said, all right. He got me a CD burned Misfits, including Halloween, Nirvana, Sex Pistols, kind of funny, Dropkick Murphys, Wolfmother. That was it. I'm pretty sure that was the entirety. Not trifecta, but quadfecta of artists that were on there. Bomber, Girls' School. This band is kick-ass, man. This is a Motorhead cover by all-female band. Is there anything else I need to say? That's kick-ass. And I remember it from Tenacious D's video game, Brutal Legend. You're driving in that fucking... going down the road, running over zombies and shit. He's a bomber! He's a bomber! I always like to sing, he's Obama. I feel like Obama should have used that as his inauguration walkout. He's a bomber! He's a bomber! Next, we got Detroit Rock City. Speaking of over-the-top rock and roll, which is what the 80s was all about, we got Kiss coming in with their... I'll bite my tongue, but I'm gonna whisper it. Only good song besides their first 2 records. I said it. We got Gene Simmons comes out, says rock and roll is dead. Bruh. Okay, I'll stop walking away from the camera. One more time. Bruh, I can't walk away from the camera like this. The guy teaching me recording engineering who used to work with the Beach Boys, and he was in Weezer, and then he did a bunch of drugs. He fucked it all up because he fell in love with a groupie and they were gangbanging her backstage without him. It was a whole thing. But I remember when Gene Simmons came out and said, rock and roll is dead. I loved the post that my buddy made. Buddy loosely, the guy who went off the rails again. He's a mess. But he said, rock and roll is dead. Dude, that guy dressed like a clown to get famous. But in reality, that bass line, that explosion at the end, it's everything that was good about Kiss. Kind of like hard rock, Beatlesy melodies with over-the-top insanity and clownship. And fucking Kiss marketed thongs. What more do you want, dude? Most people probably read the name The Cult and they say, who? You don't know? He tours as Jim Morrison now. Ian Astbury, the singer. He also tours with The Doors, being Jim Morrison, which is awesome. He also has the first track on Slash's solo album, he sings, and it's actually a banger. It's called Ghost. And Bad Fun to me sounded like a little cooler and a little more psychedelic than an AC/DC song. The Cult were also one of the first goth bands, and this song sounds nothing like the rest of their music. Dio, it's hard not to put Dio higher, but he is one of those artists that is so theatrical and so over the top it's hard not to put him a little lower than he probably deserves, because it is really, really alienating music. I personally love it. I think it's awesome. I think you can get in your car and drive fast to it. And when the fucking thing hits, you could be like, especially back when I was drinking, drugging, fucking smoking weed, it's like, boom! It's like a fun experience. The song itself is an experience. And that peak is really cataclysmic and explosive, especially in the last in line. When I was in middle school, I just moved to a new school. I was a little bit of a troublemaker. I kind of hung out with the wrong crowd, maybe. Bunch of punk ass kids with piercings and shit. Little young for that, maybe. And they would tell me that they smoked grass, and I literally was so naive that I thought they were actually smoking real grass. I was like, well, that's pretty dumb. Anyways, we were hanging out in detention as usual because we drew like funny pictures of the teachers and shit. But the irony was, detention was in the music room, and she let us play guitars, the teacher. So we'd all try to get detention so we could hang out and fucking play guitar all day in the fucking detention hall, because that was badass. And we'd also get to use YouTube. It was like, come on, this isn't so bad. What, do I want to go out for recess and fucking play on the swing, or do I want to fucking play guitar? Seemed like an easy choice. So I was in that time, I was listening to Green Day, I was listening to Neil Young a lot. I really liked Living with War. Speaking of which, Neil Young is not on any of these playlists because he took all his songs off of Spotify in some weird protest, which I accept, but just so you know, he would be on all these playlists. So I was listening to those guys, but I remember vividly in detention when these kids showed me. It was Dio, Holy Diver, and Red Hot Chili Peppers' Snow. I had grown up on Bob Dylan, Lou Reed, all that stuff, Willie Nelson. But when I heard those two songs, Dio and Red Hot, game changer. Speaking of cheesy, over-the-top metal bands, Metallica, the king. King nothing. No, we're choosing Eye of the Beholder here. You could choose one, you could choose anything off of their first 4 records, right? I mean, anything is good. I like Eye of the Beholder. I love that. I put it on in winter and I drive around. I remember when I was a kid and I'd first gotten into like the Rolling Stones, because my dad liked the Rolling Stones. I was like, this is sick. And then I heard one. I remember emailing my brother, Ross, who was like off at college and shit. And I was like, dude, you gotta get me some shit like that. Get me some of that shit. What is that shit? And he sent me And Justice for All. Banger. Now here's one nobody else will know. Click on it. Listen to it. JFA, Beach Blanket Bong Out. The song's hilarious. This is so skater punk. This is so fucking funny. But it's mostly just his voice, his lyrics, and the dirty, raw, dumb shitness of it. Dire Straits' Money for Nothing might be the greatest guitar riff of all. I can't say that, but it's very good. Maybe the best in the 80s. Sorry, Slash. Check it out. You already know it. You already know it. You know it. You know that song by heart. I want my MTV. You know it. I remember when I first met my buddy Chris. He can play Steve Vai, he can play Joe Satriani, he can play Van Halen, he can do anything. But the way that I was introduced to him was, this guy can play the intro to Dire Straits' Money for Nothing perfectly. That was more impressive. Back in Black by AC/DC. Even on my list, they're underrated. They're like the most underrated band of all time. Did you know they've never had a #1 hit in their entire career? So underrated. And yet Black Keys have like 10 hits. I'm Howlin' Wolf. It don't sound like the blues to me.
The blues is not about singing with a pretty boy voice.
I'm just playing. I like the Black Keys, but AC/DC did not get enough credit. One of the good guitar riffs of the 80s, one of the simplest songs, one of the first songs you learned to play on the guitar. Sunday Bloody Sunday by U2. Finally, U2 makes an appearance on these lists. U2 is, I remember when my buddy Sky showed me all this music when I was in middle school. And he showed me U2 alongside Sex Pistols. And I remember being like, what is this? Are you a fucking pansy? And he said to me, dude, listen. Do you hear that? It's the voice of an angel. I'll never forget. Whenever I hear U2, I'm like, the voice of an angel. Rise by Public Image Limited, a forever Johnny Rotten fan. Watch that music video. It's Johnny Rotten in a fucking car, putting his sunglasses on and off, while he looks at the camera as if he's saying something profound while he goes, anger is an energy. He is the best character of rock and roll, period. Kanye West, nobody has anything on John Lydon, who's only worth $1 million today, and was recently hospitalized for bringing squirrels into his apartment to house them and nurse them. And they bit him and gave him fucking rabies or something. Could explain a lot, right? Once in a Lifetime by the Talking Heads. Thankfully, we got to put both Take Me to the River in the 70s and Once in a Lifetime in the 80s. My two favorites by them, by far. I'll say it in the 70s and I'll say it again now. He's a voodoo man. He's a weird giant suit voodoo artist who tells you about life. If I ever divorce my wife, the song I'll be singing is Tom Petty's The Best of Everything. I think it's the most romantic love song, but it's just wishing them the best. Imagining what they're doing now, you know? Some powerful shit. Tom Petty's really good at that. I've heard it said, Tom Petty's the best at writing opening lyrics. Just the first line of his songs. The best. Is he the best of everything? Bad pun. Walk This Way, Run DMC with Aerosmith. It was a hard choice with Run DMC because I like my Adidas walk through constant doors. But the thing is, the song's an ad for Adidas shoes at the end of the day. I can't do it. It's too corporate rap. I love the way that they would kind of harmonize on and off. This is just a weird song. It's weird. If you watch the music video, it's real weird. But apparently Run DMC actually first started rapping, taking old Aerosmith records because they liked the beats, and they would just loop it on their record player, scratching. They'd scratch Aerosmith records. And Walk This Way was one of the main songs they scratched. Isn't that weird? It's kind of crazy how intertwined rap actually is with rock, which is happening more. Start Me Up, the Rolling Stones. Talk about a song you could scratch. You could use that. All the people that followed in that suit, T-Bone Walker, Slash, you know, all those artists, Joe Perry, they kind of were in the same suit of if you start me up, I'll never stop. I'll be running hot. Ooh. Just like Guns N' Roses. This is one of those songs that I thought came out in a different era. I thought this was a 60s song. It's the 80s. Rolling Stones are like AC/DC and all those bands. They don't go with the times. They fucking set the times. They do what they do, and they do it. They don't change. We got Ragdoll by Aerosmith. Talk about another song. When you listen to this intro, you realize how Run DMC could scratch records and rap over it, because that is a beat. That is a hell of a beat. And that's kind of what made Aerosmith, was the beat. So many artists across so many genres, whether it's grunge, even Nirvana, worship that band. Nice Boys, Rose Tattoo. This is a song that I would only know because it was covered by Guns N' Roses, but when I heard it, I was like, oh, I gotta check this out. It's kind of like those, you know, songs that Nirvana covered by like Fang and shit. It's like this weird, obscure thing, and it's almost weirdly tied to Axl Rose. loved Rose Tattoo. It's like one of those weird Destiny things where it's like, whoa. You see how they led to that, you know? Talk Dirty to Me by Poison. Guilty fucking pleasure. Oh, excuse me. Guitar Hero 3. I remember my brother would bring it once a week because I didn't have any video games growing up or anything. And I was in a rough place because my dad had had a stroke and I was kind of, he'd kind of become really estranged, to say the least. I didn't have shit else, but my brother would bring his game system and I would just fucking play that Guitar Hero for like 3 hours and then he'd come back and pick it up once a week. My older brothers would quiz me because I was a kid, I was like 10. And they'd be like, Paul, what songs did you like? And they were like leaning in, like, better not be Poison. Because, they were 90s kids. They grew up on Nirvana, there's no liking Poison. I admitted, I said, Talk Dirty to Me. That's my favorite. I love that. It's funny. It's fun. It's sexy. It's great. I like that. And they're just like, no. The other one that I really liked was Wave of Mutilation by Pixies. So there, I'm saved. That was my other favorite. Electric Eye by Judas Priest. Cheesiest band of all time award goes to Megadeth. Just kidding. No, they're just unlistenable. I'm kidding. Notice they won't be on any of my lists, but that's how he sounds. He sounds like a goblin. And he is a goblin. He's a horrible white supremacist asshole, douchebag, whatever. This isn't about Dave Mustaine. Dave Mustaine, if you want to fucking go, meet me outside. How about that? Just being theatrical. I think it's a really fucking catchy metal guitar riff. Kind of in the same vein of Raining Blood somehow. Maybe the same scale. But I'm a sucker for that kind of shit. What Electric Eye is to guitar riffs, Waiting Room is to bass lines. But my favorite part of that song is the backing vocals. Whispery and but they sound good. It's weird. It's really cool. Round and Round by Rat. I love that riff. I can't get enough of that riff. That riff is crazy. And I love Rat's album covers because it's always like a girl coming out of a fucking sewer and she's just like looking hot as fuck, like as if her hair just got done. And she's like coming out of the sewer. It's like, what the fuck? What the fuck is this about? Scorpion too, it's always like a girl like bent down and like bending over to get a beer and the guy's like coming up behind her. It's like the 80s was just a weird time for album covers, man. They got away with murder. It's pretty fucking funny, man. I like to make fun of that shit now, but this shit was real, man. That's wild. Hot for Teacher. Because of the double bass drums. I feel like everybody says Alex Van Halen was overlooked because he was in Eddie Van Halen's band. But I mean, the band is called Van Halen. Two wild, cracked out brothers that mastered their instruments and maestros that will go down in history. Cheesy, yes, but innovative motherfuckers. Come on, feel the noise. Girls, rock your boys. We'll get wild, wild, wild. The only reason I like this song is just because of the part where he says, so you think I got a funny face? It makes me money. I love that part. I love the lines. I love that it's this underdog anthem. And that's the good part of the 80s, was these underdog punk rock, fuck you to the system kind of attitudes. Again, amplified in the 90s. Pour Some Sugar on Me by Def Leppard, just because I can't listen to that song when I'm driving my car, or I will get in an accident. Sharp Dressed Man, ZZ Top. Is it a surprise to say that ZZ Top has some of the best guitar riffs of all time? Maybe the most underrated riff writer, right? But I think the people that know, those who know. Rock You Like a Hurricane by the Scorpions, just because I remember in high school sitting across the desk in art class from my buddy Brandon, and he tells me, and I wanted a guitar so bad, and he says, Yeah, I had a guitar. I was listening and I was trying to play fucking Rock You Like a Hurricane by Scorpions, and I finally did it right, so I smashed the guitar. And I was like, dude, I want that guitar, man. That sucks. But that intro, you know, you hear it and you're like, ah, man, I can't blame him. This guitar is done for life. It will never have a greater moment. Wild Side by Motley Crue. Weirdly, for a band that I used to hate, especially Girls, I still can't get there. Even though it's about prostitutes, I don't care. It's really, really, really fruity. And I can like Ghost, for God's sake. Finally listened to Wild Side on the radio the other day, and I was like, you know what? I like it. I like that guitar riff. 'Cause I'm burning for you. Whatever the fucking riff is. That shit is fucking awesome, dude. How can you deny Blue Oyster Cult, you know? They're a band that people are afraid of in that time. People are afraid of that shit. You know how funny that is?
He's a fucking Satanist, watch out!
That's what was awesome about metal, right? Is so many people were afraid of it. It's the end of the world as we know it. It's the end of the world as we know it. It's the end of the world as we know it. More true today than it was when it was written. Nah, I think we always feel like that. This song annoys the shit out of me, but I love it because it reminds me of camp. We were doing a full immersive camp. The only time we heard any American music was if we sang it. There's this one big kid named Mason. He's kind of a giant among all of us, you know? And he would just start belting out songs like, he'd sing the Black Parade, but he'd also sing It's the End of the World in rounds over and over and over. We'd all be singing it. And I gotta say, at the time I was like, I fucking hate that song. But now I'm like, you know what? It's got a little sentimental spot for me. That sums up my list of the 1980s. In the comments below, let me know your list of your top 50 from the 1980s. Rock on.